The crack of the auctioneer's gavel echoed like a gunshot through Katherine James's heart as she stood trembling beside her younger sister Rebecca on the dusty auction platform in Laramie, Wyoming Territory, 1875. The sisters clung to each other's hands as the crowd of rough-looking men eyed them, with expressions ranging from indifference to something far more sinister. Two fine women, strong enough for ranch work, educated enough to mind your books, the auctioneer called out, his voice booming across the makeshift square. Orphaned by the influenza outbreak, all debts to be cleared with purchase. Bidding starts at $50 for the pair. Katherine, 22 years old with honey-brown hair and determined hazel eyes, squeezed her 19-year-old sister's hand tighter. Rebecca's slender frame shook with silent sobs, her golden curls hiding her tear-streaked face. Only yesterday they had been the daughters of a respected but debt-ridden shopkeeper. Today, after their father's sudden death, they were property to be sold to cover his outstanding loans. 65. Shouted a red-faced cattle baron Katherine recognized as Theodore Walsh, a man known for his cruelty toward workers. 70, called another voice, belonging to a saloon owner with wandering hands and a reputation for forcing young women into prostitution. Each bid drove Katherine's heart deeper into despair. She had promised their dying father that she would protect Rebecca at all costs. But how could she protect anyone when they were being sold like cattle? $100, came a new voice, quieter but carrying a note of authority that silenced the crowd. The sisters turned simultaneously toward the voice. A tall man stood at the back of the gathering, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. What Katherine could see of his features suggested he was in his early 30s, with a strong jawline covered by several days' growth of beard. 100 from Grant Xavier, the auctioneer announced, visibly surprised. Any other bids? The saloon owner hesitated, then called. 125. 200, the man called Xavier countered without hesitation. The crowd murmured. $200 was a small fortune in these parts. 200 going once, the auctioneer called, his eyes scanning the crowd. Twice. The saloon owner spat in the dust and walked away. Sold to Grant Xavier for $200. Katherine felt her legs weaken. Was their fate now sealed? She'd heard stories of men buying women from these debt auctions for unspeakable purposes. She pulled Rebecca closer as the tall stranger approached the platform, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. Up close, Katherine could see his eyes were a deep blue, weathered at the corners from years of squinting into the sun. His face was tanned and lined, but not unkind. He wore simple clothes, a faded blue shirt, dark pants, and a leather vest that had seen better days. A gun belt hung at his hip, the weapon worn but well-maintained. Papers, he said simply to the auctioneer, who quickly handed over the documents transferring ownership of the James sisters to him. The man called Grant Xavier signed without hesitation, then tucked the papers inside his vest. He turned to face the sisters fully for the first time. "Miss James," he addressed Katherine directly, seeming to understand she was the elder. "I know this is not what you want, but you'll both have a home with me." His voice carried no threat, no hidden meaning that Katherine could detect. Instead, there was something that sounded almost like respect. "What kind of home?" Katherine demanded, finding her voice at last. "My sister and I won't be separated." "And we won't be, you misunderstand," he interrupted quietly. "I need a housekeeper and a teacher for the children in my care, nothing more." Rebecca raised her tear-stained face. "Children," Grant Xavier nodded. "I run the Circle X Ranch about 20 miles north of Kingston. We've taken in several orphan children from the recent outbreaks and Indian troubles. They need schooling, and I'm no good at keeping a proper home." A faint smile touched his lips. "Can't cook worth a damn either." Katherine studied him suspiciously. "And that's all you expect?" "Housekeeping and teaching. That's all," he confirmed. "You'll each have your own room, meals, and fair wages once your father's debt is paid." "Wages?" Katherine echoed, surprised. "I bought your debt, Miss James. I didn't buy you." His eyes held her steadily. "Now my wagon's this way. If you have belongings to collect, we should do so before nightfall." Katherine hesitated, still not entirely trusting this unexpected turn of events. But as she looked around at the remaining crowd, at the hungry eyes of men who would have bid if they'd had the means, she knew they had no better option. "We have trunks at our father's store," she admitted. "Not much, but what little we have left," Grant nodded. "Then let's collect them." He offered a hand to help Rebecca down from the platform. Then Katherine, his touch impersonal but gentle. An hour later, their meager possessions loaded in the back of a sturdy wagon, the James sisters found themselves heading north out of Laramie, toward Kingston and whatever awaited them at the Circle X ranch. Katherine sat beside Grant on the driver's bench, her back straight and rigid, while Rebecca huddled under a blanket in the wagon bed, exhaustion having finally claimed her. "Your sister will be safe," Grant said after they had traveled in silence for nearly an hour. "You both will." Katherine glanced sideways at him. "Forgive me if I find that hard to believe, Mr. Xavier. Men don't generally pay $200 out of the goodness of their hearts." A slight smile crossed his face. "No, I suppose they don't." He flicked the reins gently to keep the horses at a steady pace. "Truth is, Miss James, I've got 5 children ranging from 6 to 14 living at my ranch. Their parents were friends, neighbors who didn't make it through the last winter. I promised to care for them, but I'm just a rancher. The oldest boy, Thomas, is almost ready to work as a proper hand, but the rest need schooling and a woman's guidance." "And you thought buying 2 women at auction was the solution?" Katherine couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "I heard in town this morning that Jonathan James's daughters were to be auctioned to cover his debts. I knew your father by reputation, an honest man who valued education. I figured his daughters might be the same." He paused. "When I saw you both on that platform, holding each other up, I knew you were what those children needed." Katherine remained silent, processing his words, searching for deception but finding none in his straightforward manner. "Those children have lost everything, Miss James, just like you and your sister have now. I'm offering you a chance to help them, and in doing so, help yourselves." He looked at her directly. "I give you my word you and your sister will be treated with respect at the Circle X, and if after a month you wish to leave, I'll see you safely to wherever you want to go." The sincerity in his voice was compelling. Katherine found herself wanting to believe him, even as caution held her back. "What happened to their parents? The children's, I mean," she asked after another mile of silence. "Smallpox took 2 families, the Millers and the Johnsons." His voice tightened. "The Reeves were killed in a raid last fall. Little Sarah Reeves was the only survivor. She's 6 now, barely speaks." Katherine felt a pang of sympathy. 5 children orphaned so young. "This territory isn't kind to families," Grant said simply. "But we do what we can for each other." As the wagon crested a hill, Katherine caught her first glimpse of Kingston in the distance, a small but growing settlement nestled in a valley, with mountains rising majestically beyond. "It's beautiful," she admitted reluctantly. "It is that." Grant nodded. "The Circle X is another hour's ride past Kingston. We'll stop in town for supplies, then head home before dark." Home. The word caught in Katherine's mind. She had no home anymore. The store that had been in her family for 2 generations would be sold to satisfy the remainder of her father's debts. All she had left in the world was Rebecca and the few possessions in the wagon. And now, apparently, a position as housekeeper and teacher at a ranch run by a man she'd known for less than half a day. "Mr. Xavier," she began carefully, "I appreciate what you've done, truly. But I need to understand exactly what we're walking into. What are your expectations? What will our days look like? And most importantly, what happens if this arrangement doesn't work?" Grant seemed to appreciate her directness. "Fair questions. The ranch house has 6 bedrooms mine, 1 each for you and your sister, and the 3 the children share now. There's a cook's room off the kitchen, but it's been empty since Mrs. Fitzgerald passed last winter. She was the one who kept us all fed and somewhat civilized." He continued, "As for expectations, the house needs running. Meals, cleaning, mending. The children need education, reading, writing, figures. Rebecca, if she's willing, could help with the younger ones while you teach the older children, or however you decide to divide it." He adjusted his hat against the afternoon sun. "Days start early, breakfast at dawn, ranch hands fed by 6. I handle the ranch work with 4 hired hands who bunk in the bunkhouse. They don't come into the main house except for meals." Katherine nodded, mentally cataloging these details. "As for if it doesn't work," Grant continued, "I meant what I said. After a month, if you're unhappy, I'll pay your way to wherever you want to go, Denver, even San Francisco if that's what you wish. The debt will still be considered paid." It sounded almost too good to be true, which made Katherine all the more wary. But as they approached Kingston, the small but bustling town coming into clearer view, she found herself wondering if perhaps this strange twist of fate might actually be their salvation rather than their ruin. Kingston proved to be larger than Katherine had initially thought. A proper main street lined with wooden buildings, including a general store, hotel, bank, and the inevitable saloon. Several side streets branched off, revealing a church, schoolhouse, and various businesses. It wasn't Laramie, but it was clearly a town with ambitions. Grant pulled the wagon to a stop in front of Harmon's general store. "I need to pick up some supplies," he explained. "You're welcome to stretch your legs. Kingston's a decent town, safer than most in these parts." Katherine nodded and gently woke Rebecca, who blinked in confusion at their surroundings. "We're in Kingston," Katherine explained softly. "Mr. Xavier needs to collect supplies before we continue to his ranch." Rebecca looked anxiously at Grant, then back to her sister. Is he really just hiring us to work?" she whispered. "So he says," Katherine replied quietly. "We'll keep our wits about us, but for now, yes, I believe that's all he expects." The sisters climbed down from the wagon, grateful to stretch their legs after the long ride. Grant secured the horses, then turned to them. "This shouldn't take long. Feel free to look around, but stay on the main street." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a few coins. "Here, in case you need anything." Katherine stared at the money in surprise, but accepted it with a nod. "Thank you." As Grant disappeared into the general store, the sisters took the opportunity to walk slowly down the boardwalk, taking in their new surroundings. Kingston had a different feel from Laramie, newer, perhaps more hopeful. "Katie," Rebecca said softly, using her childhood name for her sister. "Do you think we'll be all right?" Katherine squeezed her sister's hand. "I think we might be. Mr. Xavier seems decent. But we'll be careful, and we'll look after each other just as we always have." As they passed the milliner's shop, Rebecca paused to admire a simple bonnet in the window. "I left my Sunday bonnet behind," she said wistfully. "Perhaps we can make new ones," Katherine suggested. "We'll ask Mr. Xavier if there are sewing supplies at the ranch." A woman exited the shop just then, nearly colliding with them. "Oh, pardon me," she exclaimed, steadying herself. "The fault was ours," Katherine replied quickly. We were blocking the way. The woman, perhaps in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pinned neatly beneath her own bonnet, studied them with interest. "You must be new to Kingston. I'm Martha Collins, the doctor's wife." "Katherine James, and this is my sister, Rebecca," Katherine introduced them, finding comfort in this small moment of normal social interaction after the tumultuous day. "James," Mrs. Collins repeated. "Are you related to the merchant in Laramie?" Katherine's expression tightened. "He was our father. He passed recently." Understanding and sympathy crossed Mrs. Collins's face. "I'm very sorry for your loss, my dears. What brings you to Kingston?" Before Katherine could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal their humiliating circumstances, a deep voice answered from behind them. "They'll be working at the Circle X," Grant said, approaching with several packages in his arms. "Miss Katherine will be teaching the children, and Miss Rebecca will be helping with the household." Mrs. Collins's face brightened. "Oh, the poor children at your ranch have needed a teacher. This is wonderful news." She turned back to the sisters. "Grant Xavier is one of our most respected ranchers, girls. Those children are lucky to have you." Katherine noticed how the woman's genuine approval of Grant seemed to lend credibility to his claims about his intentions. Perhaps he truly was what he appeared to be, a decent man trying to do right by orphan children. "We should be moving on," Grant said, loading his purchases into the wagon. "Still an hour's ride to the ranch, and I'd like to arrive before dark." Mrs. Collins nodded. "Of course. Girls, please come into town for church on Sunday. I'd love to introduce you to everyone." After exchanging goodbyes, they resumed their journey. As they left Kingston behind, the landscape opened up into rolling grasslands with the distant mountains providing a dramatic backdrop. Occasionally, Grant would point out landmarks or share bits of information about the area. "That's Thunder Ridge," he said, indicating a particularly rugged outcropping. "Good hunting there in the fall. And over there," he gestured to the west, "that's Caldwell Creek, best fishing in the territory." Katherine found herself relaxing slightly as they traveled. There was something reassuring about Grant's straightforward manner and his evident knowledge of and connection to the land. "Have you lived here long, Mr. Xavier?" Rebecca asked, finding her voice for the first time since meeting him. "Born in Pennsylvania," he replied, "but I've been in Wyoming Territory for 15 years now. Bought the land for the Circle X 10 years ago, right after the war." "You fought in the war between the states?" Katherine asked, studying his profile. He nodded once. "Union cavalry. Came west afterward, like many did. Wanted open skies and a fresh start." There was more to that story, Katherine sensed, but she didn't press. Everyone had parts of their past they preferred not to discuss. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they crested a gentle rise, and Grant pulled the wagon to a halt. "There it is," he said simply. "Circle X." Below them, nestled in a valley with a creek winding through it, lay a substantial ranch. The main house was larger than Katherine had expected, a 2-story structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings, including a large barn, bunkhouse, and what appeared to be a workshop, formed a rough half-circle around a central yard. Beyond, fenced pastures stretched into the distance, dotted with cattle. Smoke rose from the main house's chimney, a welcoming sight as the evening air grew cooler. "It's beautiful," Rebecca whispered, echoing Katherine's earlier comment about the landscape. "It's home," Grant replied simply, then flicked the reins to start the horses moving again. As they approached the ranch, Katherine noticed a flurry of activity around the main house. A tall teenage boy emerged from the barn, while a girl of perhaps 12 ran from the house onto the porch. 3 smaller children appeared behind her, all watching the approaching wagon with evident curiosity. "The children?" Katherine asked unnecessarily. Grant nodded. "Thomas is 14, the eldest. Then Anna, 12. Michael and James are the Miller boys, they're 9 and 8. Little Sarah Reeves is 6. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, and immediately the children swarmed forward, all talking at once. "You're back early," Thomas called out. "Did you bring sugar candy?" asked one of the younger boys. "Who are they?" Anna demanded, eyeing the sisters with undisguised curiosity. Grant climbed down from the wagon and helped first Rebecca, then Katherine to the ground. "Everyone," he said in a voice that immediately quieted the children, "these ladies are Miss Katherine and Miss Rebecca James. Miss Katherine will be your new teacher, and Miss Rebecca will be helping with the house. They'll be living with us now." There was a moment of silence as the children absorbed this information, their expressions ranging from suspicious to hopeful. "Can you read stories?" asked the smallest child, a tiny girl with solemn eyes whom Katherine took to be Sarah. Katherine knelt to the child's level. "I can read all sorts of stories. Would you like that?" Sarah nodded solemnly, but said nothing more. "Thomas," Grant addressed the eldest boy, "help me with the ladies' trunks and the supplies. Anna, show Miss Katherine and Miss Rebecca to their rooms, please." "Yes, sir," both children responded automatically. As Thomas moved to help Grant with the wagon, Anna approached the sisters somewhat shyly. "Your rooms are upstairs. Mrs. Fitzgerald aired them out last week before she left." Katherine exchanged a glance with Rebecca at this carefully worded explanation. It seemed the children hadn't been told of the previous housekeeper's death. They followed Anna into the house, stepping into a surprisingly spacious main room with a stone fireplace along one wall. Simple but sturdy furniture filled the space: a long dining table with benches, several chairs arranged near the fireplace, and shelves lined with books and a few modest ornaments. "The kitchen's through there," Anna explained, pointing to a doorway. "And these are the stairs." The girl led them up a wide staircase to a hallway with several doors. "That's Mr. Xavier's room," she said, indicating the door at the far end. "And these two will be yours." She opened 2 adjacent doors, revealing simple but clean bedrooms, each with a bed, dresser, washstand, and window overlooking the ranch. "This is lovely," Rebecca said, genuine relief in her voice as she peered into what would be her room. "Mrs. Fitzgerald kept everything nice," Anna said, a trace of sadness in her voice. "She said a proper home needs proper rooms, even in the wild country." Katherine touched the girl's shoulder gently. "She sounds like a wise woman." Anna nodded. "She taught me some cooking and sewing before she got sick. Mr. Xavier said I was doing a good job taking care of things, but—" She hesitated, then continued in a rush. "I'm glad you're here. It's hard to do lessons and cooking and watch Sarah all at once." The simple admission revealed much about the burden that had fallen on this 12-year-old girl's shoulders. Katherine felt a surge of purpose, regardless of the strange circumstances that had brought them here. These children clearly needed help. "Well, Rebecca and I are here now," Katherine assured her, "and we'll all figure things out together." Footsteps on the stairs announced Grant and Thomas bringing up the sisters' trunks. After depositing the belongings in their respective rooms, Grant addressed the group. "Dinner in an hour. Anna's made stew." He looked at Katherine and Rebecca. "Take some time to settle in. The washroom is at the end of the hall if you'd like to freshen up." As Grant and Thomas departed, Katherine and Rebecca found themselves alone in Katherine's assigned room. Rebecca immediately collapsed onto the bed. "I can't believe what's happened today," she whispered. "This morning we were burying Father, and now we're here in this strange place with these people we don't know." Katherine sat beside her sister and stroked her hair. I know, Becca. It's overwhelming, but I think we might have been fortunate. Mr. Xavier seems honorable, and these children clearly need help. Rebecca looked up at her sister. Do you trust him? Katherine considered the question carefully. Not entirely, not yet. But I'm willing to give him the chance to prove himself trustworthy. She squeezed Rebecca's hand. And in the meantime, we have each other, just as we always have. An hour later, somewhat refreshed and changed into the cleanest dresses they had, the sisters made their way downstairs to find the household gathered around the long table. Grant stood at the head, with the children arranged along both sides, an empty place set at the foot and 2 spaces left open along one side. Miss Katherine, Miss Rebecca, Grant greeted them with a nod. Please join us. As they took their seats, Katherine noticed the tantalizing aroma of beef stew filling the room. A large pot sat at the center of the table, with a loaf of bread slightly lopsided but freshly baked beside it. Anna made the stew and bread, Grant explained, pride evident in his voice. She's become quite the cook these past months. Anna blushed at the praise. Mrs. Fitzgerald left good recipes, she said modestly. Before we eat, Grant continued, we say grace in this house. He bowed his head and the others followed suit. Lord, we thank you for this food and for bringing Miss Katherine and Miss Rebecca safely to us. Guide us all in the days ahead. Amen. Amen, echoed around the table. As they began to eat, the initial awkwardness gradually gave way to conversation. The younger boys, Michael and James, peppered the sisters with questions about Laramie and whether they knew how to fish or ride horses. Anna wanted to know if Katherine could teach her more advanced mathematics, while Thomas remained quieter, observing more than participating. Little Sarah said nothing at all but watched Rebecca intently as she ate her stew. Tomorrow, Grant said as the meal progressed, I thought perhaps we might take a day to get everyone acquainted with the ranch and establish how things will work. The actual teaching can start the following day. Katherine nodded. That seems sensible. I'd like to understand what the children have already learned and what materials we have available. There's a small schoolroom off the main room, Grant explained. Mrs. Fitzgerald used it for lessons when the weather was too poor for the children to go to town. There are some books and slates. Did the children attend school in Kingston before? Rebecca asked. Grant shook his head. Only occasionally. It's a long ride and not practical in winter. Most of their education has been here at the ranch. After dinner, the children helped clear the table, and Grant showed the sisters the schoolroom, a modest space with a blackboard, several desks, and a bookshelf containing basic readers, a mathematics primer, and a well-worn Bible. It's not much, Grant admitted, but I hope it will serve. It will be fine to start with, Katherine assured him. We can always make or acquire more materials as needed. As the evening progressed, the younger children were sent to bed, with Anna taking responsibility for seeing Sarah properly settled. Thomas went to check on the horses one last time, leaving the sisters alone with Grant in the main room. I want to thank you again, Grant said, his voice low and serious as he stood by the fireplace. I know this situation is far from ideal for you both, but I believe it can work out well for everyone involved. Katherine studied him in the firelight, trying to reconcile the man who had purchased them at auction with this thoughtful rancher who seemed genuinely concerned for orphan children. May I ask you something, Mr. Xavier? She said finally. He nodded. Of course. Why did you really come to that auction today? There must be women in Kingston or nearby who could have filled this position. Why travel all the way to Laramie? Grant was silent for a long moment, considering his answer. Truth is, Miss James, I've been trying to find someone suitable for months. The few unmarried women in Kingston either have family obligations or aren't interested in taking on 5 orphans along with a ranch to run. And I'm not looking for a wife, which makes things complicated. He stared into the fire. I heard about your father's passing and the auction from a freight driver who came through Kingston yesterday. He mentioned that Jonathan James's daughters were educated women who might be facing a difficult situation. I thought perhaps, well, that our needs might align. So you decided to buy us, Katherine stated flatly. Grant met her gaze directly. I decided to offer you a way out of an impossible situation. The money paid your father's debt and gave you both a fresh start. Whether you see that as a purchase or an opportunity is up to you. The blunt honesty of his response took Katherine by surprise. Before she could formulate a reply, Rebecca spoke up. I think it was kind, she said softly. What would have happened to us otherwise, Katie? You know what those other men at the auction wanted. The 3 of them fell silent, the crackle of the fire the only sound in the room. Finally, Katherine sighed. You're right, both of you, and I am grateful, Mr. Xavier. Truly, it's just been a very difficult day. I understand, he said simply. And please, both of you should call me Grant. Mr. Xavier makes me feel like I should be looking for my father. A small smile tugged at Katherine's lips despite herself. Very well, Grant, he nodded, seemingly satisfied. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a full day. As the sisters climbed the stairs to their rooms a short while later, Rebecca whispered, I think we'll be all right here, Katie. I really do. Katherine squeezed her sister's hand. I hope you're right, Becca. I truly hope you're right. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed in a strange house, Katherine found sleep elusive. The day's events played through her mind in a continuous loop: her father's funeral, the auction, the long journey to the Circle X. And through it all, Grant Xavier's steady blue gaze and unexpected kindness. Outside her window, the vast Wyoming sky sparkled with stars, more than she'd ever seen in Laramie. The immensity of the landscape matched the enormity of the changes in her life. As she finally drifted towards sleep, Katherine found herself hoping that perhaps these changes, traumatic as they were, might somehow lead to something better for both her and Rebecca. Dawn arrived with the crowing of a rooster and the distant sounds of activity from the barn. Katherine rose, quickly washed, and dressed in one of her simpler dresses practical for what she assumed would be a day of learning the workings of the ranch. She found Rebecca already awake and similarly preparing for the day. Did you sleep well? Katherine asked, helping her sister pin up her golden curls. Better than I expected, Rebecca admitted. The bed is comfortable, and it's so quiet here compared to Laramie. No saloon noise or freight wagons passing all night. They made their way downstairs to find the kitchen already bustling with activity. Anna was at the stove, frying bacon and stirring a pot of porridge. Thomas was carrying in fresh milk, while the younger boys set the table under Sarah's solemn supervision. Good morning, Katherine greeted them. Is there something we can help with? Anna turned, relief visible on her young face. Oh yes, could you make the biscuits? The men will be in soon for breakfast, and I haven't started them yet. Of course, Katherine replied, rolling up her sleeves. Rebecca, would you cut more bacon while I mix the dough? The sisters quickly found their places in the morning routine, working alongside the children with growing ease. Katherine noted how well the children worked together clearly. They had developed their own system in the months since Mrs. Fitzgerald's passing, with Anna taking on the bulk of the household responsibilities. Grant entered as they were placing the food on the table, followed by 4 ranch hands, weathered men who nodded respectfully to the sisters before taking their places at the far end of the table. Miss Katherine, Miss Rebecca, Grant introduced them. These are my hands: Joe Miller, Frank Wilson, Eduardo Vasquez, and Charlie Thompson. Men, these ladies will be running the household and teaching the children from now on. You'll treat them with the same respect you showed Mrs. Fitzgerald." The men murmured their agreement, and breakfast proceeded with the pleasant chaos of multiple conversations and the passing of food. Katherine observed how Grant interacted with both the children and his workers firm but fair, maintaining authority without resorting to harshness. After the ranch hands departed for their day's work, Grant outlined the plan for the sisters' first full day at the Circle X. "I thought we'd start with a tour of the ranch house and outbuildings," he explained, "so you understand the full operation. Then perhaps this afternoon, Katherine, you might spend some time with the children to assess their education levels." The morning passed quickly as Grant showed them through the entire property. The ranch house was larger than it had initially appeared, with several rooms Katherine hadn't seen the previous evening, including a small library that delighted both sisters. "My mother was a great reader," Grant explained as they admired the modest but well-curated collection of books. "When she passed, I brought her books west with me. Couldn't bear to leave them behind." The tour continued through the barn, workshop, smokehouse, and root cellar. Grant explained the seasonal rhythm of ranch life, from spring calving to summer grazing to fall roundups and winter preparations. "We're coming into summer now," he noted as they walked across the central yard. "It's our easier season in some ways, though there's never truly a slow time on a working ranch." As they passed the corral, Rebecca paused to admire the horses. "They're beautiful," she said softly. Grant nodded. "Do either of you ride?" "A little," Katherine admitted. "Our father kept a horse for deliveries, and we sometimes rode him on Sundays." "Rebecca will need to learn if she's to go into town for supplies," Grant said. "There's a gentle mare that would suit her well. And Katherine, you might want to become comfortable enough to accompany the children if they ride to Sunday services in Kingston." By midday, Katherine's head was spinning with information, but she felt increasingly confident that she and Rebecca could manage their new responsibilities. After a simple lunch, she gathered the children in the schoolroom for an informal assessment of their knowledge. Thomas, as the eldest, had the most advanced education, reading well and showing a good grasp of basic mathematics. Anna was an avid reader but struggled with arithmetic. The younger boys had basic reading skills but needed considerable work on writing and figures. Little Sarah, it became clear, knew her letters but was only beginning to read simple words. "You're all doing very well considering the circumstances," Katherine told them encouragingly. "Tomorrow we'll begin regular lessons. I'll work with each of you at your own level." As the afternoon progressed, Rebecca spent time with Anna in the kitchen, learning the girls' cooking routines and offering suggestions from her own experience helping in their father's household. Katherine was impressed by how quickly her sister seemed to be adapting to their new situation. By evening, as they gathered for another meal around the long table, Katherine felt a tentative sense of belonging beginning to take root. The children were responding well to both sisters, and even Grant seemed more relaxed than he had the previous day. After the younger children were in bed, Grant invited the sisters to join him on the front porch. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine from the distant mountains. The three of them sat in comfortable rocking chairs, watching as the last light faded from the western sky. "How do you find everything so far?" Grant asked, his voice quiet in the gathering dusk. "Better than I expected," Katherine admitted honestly. "The children are wonderful and the ranch is impressive. It's taken years to build it to what it is now," Grant said, pride evident in his tone. "When I first came here, there was nothing but open grassland and that creek." The first winter, I lived in a one-room cabin that stood where the workshop is now. You've accomplished a great deal, Rebecca observed. Especially taking in the children. That speaks well of your character. Grant shrugged, seemingly uncomfortable with the praise. They needed someone. Their parents were good neighbors to me. It was the least I could do. Nevertheless, Katherine said, it's more than many would have done. They sat in companionable silence for a time, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional whinny of a horse, the chorus of crickets and frogs from the direction of the creek. I have a proposition for you both, Grant said eventually. Rather than think of this arrangement as working off your father's debt, what if we consider it employment from the start? I'll pay you fair wages, say $20 a month each plus room and board. Katherine was startled by the offer. That's very generous. It's fair, Grant countered. The work you're doing has value, and this way you'll be building something for yourselves, not just paying for the past. Rebecca leaned forward. Does this mean we could leave whenever we want, if we're employees rather than indebted? Grant nodded. That was always the case, but yes, I want to be clear about it. You're free to go whenever you choose. I hope you'll stay, for the children's sake if nothing else, but I won't hold you here against your will. Katherine studied him in the fading light, trying to understand his motives. Why are you doing this? Grant was silent for a long moment. Because I know what it's like to have your choices taken away, he said finally. And I don't want to be the one doing that to someone else. There was a story behind those words, Katherine sensed, but it wasn't the time to press for details. Instead, she simply said, "Thank you. We accept your offer." As the days turned into weeks, life at the Circle X settled into a rhythm that became increasingly comfortable for the James sisters. Katherine established a regular schedule of lessons for the children, dividing their days between academic subjects and practical skills. Rebecca took charge of the household, working with Anna to ensure meals were prepared, laundry completed, and the house maintained to a standard that even their meticulous father would have approved. Grant proved to be a fair employer, respecting the sisters' authority in their respective domains while providing guidance when needed. He was often absent during daylight hours, working with his hands on various aspects of the ranch operation, but he made a point of being present for meals and spending time with the children each evening. As June bloomed across the Wyoming landscape, Katherine found herself increasingly drawn to the rugged beauty of the territory. On Sundays, after attending services at the small church in Kingston, she often took long walks along the creek that ran through the Circle X property, marveling at wildflowers and watching eagles soar overhead. It was during one such Sunday afternoon, about 3 weeks after their arrival, that Grant found her sitting on a fallen log beside the creek, sketching in a small book she'd discovered in the library. "I didn't know you were an artist," he commented, approaching from the direction of the ranch house. Katherine looked up, momentarily startled. "Oh, I'm not really. Just something I enjoy when I have the time." Grant sat beside her on the log, leaving a respectful distance between them. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her sketchbook. She hesitated, then handed it to him. The page showed a rough but recognizable drawing of the ranch house with the mountains rising behind it. "This is good," he said, genuine appreciation in his voice. "You've captured the way the light hits the east side in the afternoon." "Thank you," Katherine replied, pleased by his observation. "I used to sketch the mountains visible from Laramie, but these are so much more dramatic." "The Laramie range is gentler," Grant agreed, returning the sketchbook. "These mountains have more character." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the creek's water sparkle in the afternoon sun. "The children are thriving under your instruction," Grant said eventually. Thomas asked if he could learn more advanced mathematics. Says he wants to understand how to calculate acreage and cattle yields. Katherine smiled. He has a good mind for it. I've been using the ranch's operations to make the lessons more relevant to them all. Anna is particularly interested in the household accounts. And Rebecca seems to have won Sarah's trust, Grant observed. I heard the child actually laughing yesterday, first time since she came to us. Rebecca has always had a way with children, Katherine said fondly. Even when we were young, neighborhood children would follow her around like ducklings. Grant chuckled at the image. The two of you have brought life back to the ranch. I didn't realize how mechanical things had become until you arrived. Katherine studied his profile, noting the lines of fatigue around his eyes despite his smile. It can't have been easy trying to run the ranch and care for 5 children on your own. We managed, he said simply, but it's better now. A question that had been lingering in Katherine's mind for weeks finally found voice. Grant, may I ask you something personal? He turned to face her fully, his blue eyes meeting hers. You may ask, I might not answer. She appreciated his honesty. Why haven't you remarried? It would seem the conventional solution to needing help with the children and the household. Grant's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, grew more distant. I was married once, before the war. Her name was Elizabeth. He fell silent, and Katherine wondered if that was all the answer she would receive. But after a moment, he continued. When I went to fight, she stayed with her parents in Philadelphia. I received letters regularly for the first year. Then they stopped coming. His voice remained even, but Katherine could hear the old pain beneath the words. After Gettysburg, I got word she'd married a local businessman who'd paid to avoid service. By the time I returned home after Appomattox, they'd moved west to San Francisco. I'm sorry, Katherine said softly. Grant shrugged. It was a long time ago, but it taught me something about making promises that depend on feelings. Emotions change. Duty remains. He gestured toward the ranch house visible in the distance. I made promises to those children. I can keep those promises without risking my heart again. Katherine absorbed his words, understanding far more about Grant Xavier than she had before. His commitment to the orphaned children wasn't just neighborly kindness, it was a man honoring his word at all costs, perhaps the only thing he still trusted. And what about you, Katherine? Grant asked, turning the conversation away from himself. You're an educated woman with considerable talents. Did you never wish to marry? It was Katherine's turn to look away. There were possibilities in Laramie. A clerk at the bank expressed interest last year. But I couldn't leave Rebecca, not with father's health failing, and now you're here, Grant finished for her, bound by your own promises and duties. Yes, she agreed, though I'm finding those duties less burdensome than I might have expected. A small smile touched Grant's lips. High praise indeed from a woman who was auctioned into this situation. Katherine surprised herself by laughing. When you put it that way, I suppose my expectations were rather low. But in truth, Grant, you've been more than fair. The children are delightful. And I believe we're doing good work here. We are, he agreed, standing and offering her his hand. And speaking of work, I believe Rebecca mentioned something about apple pie for supper, and I should check the north pasture fence before dark. Katherine took his hand, allowing him to help her to her feet. For just a moment, they stood closer than was strictly proper, and Katherine found herself noticing details she'd previously overlooked: a small scar at his temple disappearing into his hairline. The fact that his eyes weren't simply blue, but had flecks of gray near the pupil. The clean scent of soap and leather that surrounded him. Grant seemed to become aware of their proximity at the same moment and stepped back, releasing her hand. Sunday supper waits for no man, he said lightly. "Not even the ranch owner." As they walked back toward the house, maintaining a careful distance between them, Katherine reflected on their conversation. Grant Xavier was a more complicated man than she'd initially believed, with depths of experience and feeling beneath his practical exterior. And she was beginning to suspect that her own feelings toward him were becoming equally complicated. July brought scorching heat to Wyoming Territory, turning the landscape golden as the grasses dried under the relentless sun. Life at the Circle X adjusted to the season. Lessons moved to early morning before the schoolroom became unbearably hot. Ranch work shifted to focus on ensuring adequate water for the cattle, and the household routine centered around preserving the garden's abundant produce for the winter ahead. One particularly sweltering afternoon, Grant announced at lunch that he would be taking the children to swim in the deepest part of the creek. "It's a tradition on the hottest days," he explained. "There's a swimming hole about a quarter-mile downstream. You ladies are welcome to join us." Rebecca immediately brightened at the idea. "Oh, that sounds wonderful. I feel like I've been melting all day." Katherine hesitated, more reserved by nature than her sister. "I'm not sure." "There's a bend in the creek with a stand of cottonwoods," Grant assured her. "The women can have privacy there while the children and I use the main swimming hole. It's perfectly proper." The promise of cool water proved too tempting to resist. An hour later, the entire household made their way to the creek, carrying towels and a picnic basket Anna had hastily prepared. As promised, Grant showed the sisters to a secluded bend in the creek, then led the excited children farther downstream. "We'll return in an hour," he called over his shoulder. "The water's deep enough to swim properly in the middle, but be careful of the current." When they were alone, Rebecca wasted no time in removing her shoes and stockings, then raising her skirts to wade ankle-deep into the creek. "Oh, it's perfect," she exclaimed. "Cool but not freezing." Katherine followed more cautiously, but soon had to agree with her sister's assessment. The creek water was refreshingly cool against her skin, a blessed relief from the oppressive heat. "I wish we could actually swim," Rebecca sighed, splashing water onto her arms and face, "like we used to at Miller's Pond when we were girls." Katherine glanced around at their secluded location, temptation warring with propriety. "Well, there's no one to see," she said finally, "if we keep our chemises on." Rebecca's eyes widened. "Katherine James, are you suggesting we behave scandalously?" A mischievous smile crossed Katherine's face. "I'm suggesting we cool off properly on the hottest day of the year, and technically, we're still dressed." After a moment of hesitation, both sisters shed their outer clothing, leaving only their chemises, which fell to their knees. Giggling like the girls they had once been, they waded deeper into the creek, then plunged fully into the cool water. For the next half hour they swam and splashed, the heat and worries of recent months temporarily washed away by the flowing water. Katherine floated on her back, watching clouds drift across the brilliant blue sky, feeling truly peaceful for the first time since their father's death. Eventually, conscious of time passing, they reluctantly returned to the bank and began to dry off and dress. Katherine was just pinning up her damp hair when they heard voices approaching Grant and the children returning from their swim downstream. "Miss Katherine, Miss Rebecca," called Michael's excited voice. "Did you swim too? We had the best time. Thomas taught me to dive." The sisters exchanged a conspiratorial glance before Katherine answered. "Yes, we had a lovely swim as well." As the group made their way back to the ranch house, the children chattering happily about their adventure, Katherine noticed Grant watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. There was warmth there, certainly, but something else too, a thoughtfulness, perhaps even admiration, that sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. That evening, after the children were in bed, Katherine found herself alone with Grant on the front porch once again. Rebecca had retired early, claiming fatigue from their afternoon excursion. "The children will remember this day fondly," Katherine commented, settling into her usual rocking chair. "Simple pleasures often make the strongest memories," Grant nodded. "My father used to say the same thing. He'd take my brothers and me fishing instead of to town for our birthdays. Said experiences were worth more than store-bought gifts." "You've never mentioned brothers before," Katherine observed, realizing how little she still knew about his early life. "Two older brothers," Grant confirmed. "Both died at Antietam early in the war, before I enlisted." "I'm sorry," Katherine said softly. The war had ended a decade ago, but its losses still echoed across the country. Grant acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "It was a long time ago. But it's why I understood what those children needed when their parents died. I know what it is to have your family torn away." They rocked in silence for a time, the rhythmic creaking of the chairs blending with the evening chorus of crickets and distant coyotes. "May I ask you something, Katherine?" Grant said eventually. "Of course. Are you and Rebecca happy here?" The question took her by surprise, both its directness and the hint of vulnerability behind it. Katherine considered her answer carefully. "I believe Rebecca is truly happy," she said finally. "She's blossomed here in ways I never expected. The children adore her, and she takes genuine pride in running the household." "And you?" Grant pressed gently. Katherine met his gaze in the fading light. "I'm content in ways I didn't think possible when we first arrived. The teaching brings me satisfaction. The children are making excellent progress, and I've come to appreciate the beauty and freedom of this place. But not happy." There was no accusation in his tone, only genuine interest. "Happiness has always seemed to me a fleeting thing," Katherine admitted. "Moments of joy rather than a constant state. By that measure, yes. I've experienced happiness here watching Sarah learn to read her first full sentence, seeing the sunset paint the mountains, swimming in the creek today." Grant seemed to consider her words carefully. "That's a thoughtful answer, more honest than most would give." "Did you expect less from me?" she asked, a touch of challenge in her voice. "No," he replied simply. "I've come to expect honesty from you in all things, Katherine. It's one of your finest qualities." The compliment, delivered so matter-of-factly, warmed her more than it should have. Katherine was suddenly grateful for the dimness that hid the color she felt rising in her cheeks. "The month you promised us has passed," she said, changing the subject slightly. "Rebecca and I have not spoken of leaving." Grant's hand stilled on the arms of his rocking chair. "Are you telling me you wish to go? Or that you've decided to stay?" "I'm saying that we're no longer here out of necessity alone," Katherine clarified. "We're here by choice now. I wanted you to know that." A smile touched his lips, visible even in the gathering darkness. "I'm glad to hear it. The ranch would be a poorer place without you both." Just then, the door opened and Thomas stepped onto the porch. "Mr. Xavier, there's a problem with the new calf. Eduardo says you should come." Grant immediately rose. "Excuse me, Katherine. Duty calls." As he strode away with Thomas, Katherine remained on the porch, rocking gently and considering their conversation. The truth, which she hadn't quite admitted even to herself until now, was that her feelings for Grant Xavier had grown beyond respect and gratitude. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, noticing his absence when he was away from the ranch house, appreciating his strength and kindness in equal measure. It was foolish, she told herself firmly. Grant had made it clear he had no interest in romantic entanglements. And her own situation remained complicated. She and Rebecca were, technically, his employees. Any deeper relationship would be inappropriate. Yet as she finally rose to go inside, Katherine couldn't deny the warmth that had blossomed in her heart, a feeling that went well beyond contentment, verging dangerously close to what others might indeed call happiness. August arrived with violent thunderstorms that broke the heat, but brought new challenges. One particularly fierce storm left the creek swollen beyond its banks, temporarily cutting off access to Kingston. The ranch hands worked tirelessly to ensure the cattle weren't stranded in low-lying areas, and Grant spent long days in the saddle, returning each evening exhausted but satisfied that the Circle X was weathering the seasonal tempests. Life inside the ranch house continued with its own rhythm. Katherine had expanded the children's education to include practical subjects. Thomas was learning basic veterinary care from Grant and ranch management from the account books, while Anna's natural talent for numbers was being channeled into bookkeeping skills. The younger boys were progressing well with their reading and writing, and even quiet Sarah had begun to participate more actively in lessons, particularly showing an interest in drawing. One stormy afternoon, as rain lashed against the windows of the schoolroom, Katherine was helping Michael with his sums when Rebecca burst in, her expression alarmed. "Katie, you need to come quickly. It's Sarah, she's burning with fever." Katherine immediately set the other children to independent work and followed her sister upstairs to the small bedroom Sarah shared with Anna. The child lay listlessly on her bed, her face flushed and her nightgown damp with sweat. "How long has she been like this?" Katherine asked, placing a hand on Sarah's forehead and feeling the alarming heat radiating from her small body. "Anna noticed she wasn't eating at lunch," Rebecca explained. "I thought she was just tired, but when I checked on her just now." She gestured helplessly at the clearly ill child. "We need to get her fever down," Katherine said decisively. "Rebecca, prepare a cool bath. Anna," she addressed the worried girl hovering in the doorway, "fetch clean linens and nightclothes, and someone needs to find Grant." "He rode out with Eduardo to check the north pasture," Thomas said, appearing behind Anna. "I can go after him." Katherine nodded. "Be careful, the creek might still be high." As Thomas ran to saddle a horse, Katherine and Rebecca worked to bring Sarah's fever down. They bathed her in cool water, dressed her in a fresh nightgown, and tried to coax her to drink small sips of water. The child's condition seemed to stabilize somewhat, but Katherine remained deeply concerned. She had seen influenza sweep through Laramie 2 winters ago, taking both the young and the elderly with frightening speed. "Should we try to get her to the doctor in Kingston?" Rebecca asked, wringing out a cloth to place on Sarah's forehead. Katherine considered the option. The creek crossing might not be safe yet, and moving her in this condition. Their discussion was interrupted by the sound of horses arriving. Moments later, heavy footsteps bounded up the stairs and Grant appeared in the doorway, his clothes soaked from riding through the rain, his expression taut with concern. "Thomas told me," he said, crossing immediately to Sarah's bedside and kneeling beside her. "Sarah, can you hear me, little one?" The child's eyes fluttered open. "Papa Grant," she murmured, using the name she'd adopted for him in recent weeks. "I'm here," he assured her, his large hand gentle as he brushed damp hair from her forehead. The tender gesture revealed a depth of feeling that caught Katherine by surprise. "She's very ill," Katherine said softly. "The fever came on suddenly." Grant nodded grimly. "I've seen this before. The Miller boys had something similar last winter." He straightened up, decision made. "I'm riding to Kingston for the doctor." "The creek," Katherine began. "There's a higher crossing 3 miles upstream," Grant interrupted. "It'll add an hour to the journey, but it should be passable." He looked at Katherine directly. "Can you manage here?" "Of course," she assured him. "We'll do everything possible to keep her comfortable and the fever down." Grant hesitated, then placed a hand briefly on Katherine's shoulder. "I know you will. I trust you, Katherine." The simple declaration, delivered in such a moment of crisis, carried more weight than any flowery praise could have. Katherine nodded, acknowledging both his confidence and the responsibility it entailed. "Go," she said. "We'll be waiting." The hours that followed tested everyone in the household. Sarah's fever continued to climb despite their efforts, and by evening she had begun coughing a deep, racking sound that shook her tiny frame. Katherine and Rebecca took turns sitting with her, while Anna organized the younger boys to keep the household running, and Thomas helped the remaining ranch hands with essential chores. Night fell with no sign of Grant or the doctor. A relentless rain continued to pound the roof, occasionally punctuated by rumbles of thunder that seemed to echo the anxiety within the house. Shortly after midnight, as Katherine sat beside Sarah's bed, gently singing a lullaby her own mother had once sung to her, she heard the blessed sound of horses in the yard. Minutes later, Grant appeared with Dr. Collins, both men drenched but determined. Martha Collins followed close behind her husband, carrying a large medical bag. "We came as soon as the message reached us," she explained, moving immediately to Sarah's bedside. "Joseph, she's burning up." The doctor, a distinguished man with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes, quickly examined Sarah, listening to her chest and checking her pulse. His expression grew increasingly grave. "Pneumonia," he diagnosed finally. "Likely following a mild influenza. The poor child's lungs are congested." "Can you help her?" Grant asked, the question simple but laden with fear. Dr. Collins sighed. "We'll do everything possible. Martha, prepare a mustard plaster. We need to ease her breathing." He turned to Katherine. "You've been keeping her cool, getting fluids into her." Katherine nodded. "As much as we could. She's taken a little broth and water." "Good. That's exactly right." The doctor opened his bag, removing several bottles and packets. "I'll prepare a medicine to help with the fever and cough. The next 24 hours will be critical." What followed was a night of intense vigilance. Mrs. Collins applied the mustard plaster to Sarah's chest, while the doctor prepared medicines. Katherine and Rebecca assisted where needed, following instructions precisely and providing fresh water and linens. Grant remained a constant presence, sometimes sitting silently beside Sarah's bed, sometimes pacing the hallway outside her room, his face etched with worry. Once, in the darkest hours of the night, Katherine found him standing at the window, staring out at the rain-lashed darkness, his shoulders rigid with tension. "Grant," she said softly, approaching him with a cup of coffee. "You should rest. There's nothing more to be done right now." He accepted the cup but shook his head. "I can't, not until—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Katherine stood beside him, understanding his fear all too well. "When my mother died," she said quietly, "I was 14. I sat beside her bed for 3 days, refusing to sleep, convinced that if I closed my eyes, she would slip away." Grant turned to look at her, silent but attentive. "My father finally told me something I've never forgotten. He said that love doesn't keep death at bay, it simply ensures that we're not alone when it comes." Katherine met Grant's tired eyes. "Sarah isn't alone, whether she recovers or not, and I pray with all my heart that she will. She knows she's loved." Grant's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Katherine agreed. "Not perfect, as we discovered after his death, but wise in the ways that matter most." They stood together at the window for a time, the silence between them comfortable despite the circumstances. Eventually, Grant spoke again. "When Sarah first came to the Circle X, she wouldn't speak at all, not a single word for weeks." His voice was low, meant only for Katherine. The night she finally spoke, all she said was safe, just that one word, but it was enough. Katherine felt tears prick at her eyes. She is safe, Grant. Whatever happens, you've given her that. As dawn broke, Sarah's fever finally began to ease. By mid-morning, the doctor pronounced her out of immediate danger, though recovery would be slow. She'll need careful nursing for at least a week, Dr. Collins instructed. Keep her warm. Continue with the medicine every 4 hours and build up her strength with broth and, eventually, more substantial food. We'll see to it, Katherine promised. Mrs. Collins, who had been observing Katherine throughout the night, nodded approvingly. You have a natural gift for nursing, my dear. Sarah is fortunate to have you. The Collins departed after extracting a promise that they would be summoned immediately if Sarah's condition worsened. The household settled into a new routine centered around the sick child's care, with Katherine coordinating a schedule that ensured Sarah was never alone while still maintaining essential lessons and chores. That evening, after the other children were in bed, Katherine sat beside Sarah while the little girl slept peacefully for the first time in 24 hours. The worst seemed to be past, though the child remained weak and pale. Quiet footsteps announced Grant's arrival. He had finally changed out of his rain-soaked clothes and looked somewhat refreshed, though fatigue still lined his face. "How is she?" he asked, taking the chair on the opposite side of Sarah's bed. "Better," Katherine assured him. "Her breathing is easier and the fever is almost gone. She even ate a few spoonfuls of broth an hour ago." Grant nodded, relief evident in every line of his body. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything you did. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." "Rebecca and Anna helped just as much," Katherine demurred. "They did," Grant agreed. "But you led the household through this crisis. You kept everyone calm and focused when it would have been easy to panic." Katherine was saved from having to respond by Sarah stirring slightly. The child's eyes opened, focusing first on Katherine, then shifting to Grant. "Papa Grant," she whispered, her voice raspy but clear. "You stayed." Grant reached out to take her small hand in his. "Of course I stayed, little one. I'll always stay." Sarah smiled faintly, then looked at Katherine. "You too?" The simple question caught Katherine off guard. She glanced at Grant, whose expression remained carefully neutral despite the intensity in his eyes. "Yes, Sarah," Katherine answered finally. "I'll stay too." The child seemed satisfied with this answer and drifted back to sleep, still holding Grant's hand. Neither adult spoke for several minutes, the weight of the moment hanging between them. Finally, Grant broke the silence. "Did you mean that?" he asked quietly. "About staying?" Katherine met his gaze directly. "I did. This is our home now, Rebecca's and mine, unless—" She hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "Unless you've changed your mind about wanting us here." "Changed my mind," Grant repeated, genuine surprise in his voice. "Katherine, these past days have only confirmed what I already knew. You and Rebecca belong here. The children need you. The ranch needs you." He paused, then added so softly she almost missed it. "I need you." The admission, simple as it was, shifted something fundamental between them. Katherine felt her heart quicken as Grant's eyes held hers across the sleeping child's bed. "Then we'll stay," she said, her voice steady despite her inner turbulence. "For as long as we're needed." Grant nodded, a complexity of emotions crossing his face before he schooled his features back to their usual reserve. "You should get some rest," he said eventually. "I'll sit with Sarah for a while." Katherine rose, suddenly aware of her own exhaustion after the long night of vigilance. "Wake me if there's any change," she instructed, professional concern reasserting itself. "I will," Grant promised. At the door, Katherine paused and looked back. The sight of Grant Xavier, strong, capable, sometimes stern, tenderly watching over the sleeping child's stirred emotions she was too tired to examine closely. But as she made her way to her own room, she knew with certainty that the feelings taking root in her heart were beyond her power to control. September brought cooler weather and the beginning of fall roundup, the busiest season on the Circle X. Grant and his hands worked from dawn until well after dusk, gathering cattle from the summer range, separating calves, and preparing for cattle drives in winter. Sarah recovered fully from her illness, though she remained somewhat more delicate than before. The experience had changed the household in subtle ways. Sarah had become more attached to both Katherine and Grant, often seeking them out together, as if reassuring herself that they were both still there. The other children, too, seemed to have crossed some invisible threshold in their relationship with the James sisters. What had begun as a formal arrangement had evolved into something approaching family. Katherine no longer thought of herself primarily as their teacher, but rather as a blend of educator, caretaker, and confidante. One crisp morning in late September, as Katherine was gathering eggs from the henhouse, she was surprised to see a wagon approaching the ranch, an unusual sight during the busy roundup season. As it drew closer, she recognized Dr. and Mrs. Collins, along with another woman she didn't immediately place. Setting down her basket of eggs, Katherine smoothed her apron and went to greet the visitors. Dr. Collins, Mrs. Collins, what a pleasant surprise. Martha Collins descended from the wagon with her husband's assistance. "Good morning, Katherine. We've brought someone we thought you'd be pleased to see." The third visitor turned and Katherine gasped in surprise. "Miss Harriet, I can hardly believe it." Harriet Peterson, a spinster schoolteacher who had taught both Katherine and Rebecca in Laramie, beamed as she embraced her former pupil. "Katherine, my dear, when Martha wrote that you were here in Kingston Territory, I had to come see for myself. You know each other, Mrs. Collins asked, clearly pleased by the reunion. "Miss Peterson taught us for 6 years, Katherine explained. "She's the reason I became interested in teaching myself." The older teacher smiled modestly. "Katherine was always my most promising student. When I heard what happened after your father's passing, dear, I was beside myself with worry." Katherine's smile faltered slightly at the reminder of the auction. "As you can see, things worked out surprisingly well. Please come inside. Rebecca will be thrilled to see you." As they entered the house, Katherine quickly introduced Miss Peterson to Rebecca and the children, who had just finished their morning lessons. Rebecca's delight at seeing their former teacher matched Katherine's own, and soon they were all seated in the main room, sharing news and memories. "I've retired from the schoolhouse in Laramie," Miss Peterson explained. "My sister in Denver has been unwell, so I'm on my way there to live with her. When I wrote to Martha asking if she knew anything of the James sisters' whereabouts, I was overjoyed to learn you were nearby." "We've been meaning to visit for weeks," Martha Collins added, "but with roundup underway, we knew Grant would be occupied. It seemed the perfect opportunity to bring Harriet for a visit before she continues her journey." Katherine noticed a meaningful glance pass between Mrs. Collins and Miss Peterson, but thought little of it as they continued their pleasant conversation. The children, particularly Thomas and Anna, were fascinated by stories of Katherine and Rebecca as young students. "Miss Katherine was always just as serious about her studies," Miss Peterson told them with a fond smile. "Rebecca was our class songbird. She had the sweetest voice in the school choir." "She still sings beautifully," Anna said. "She teaches us songs while we do chores." Rebecca blushed at the praise. "Only simple tunes, nothing fancy." The conversation continued through lunch, which Rebecca and Anna hastily prepared. As the meal concluded, Mrs. Collins suggested that Rebecca show Miss Peterson the garden, which was yielding its fall harvest. This left Katherine alone with Martha Collins as they cleared the lunch dishes. "You seem very settled here," Mrs. Collins observed, helping Katherine stack plates. "We are," Katherine agreed. "More so than I would have thought possible given how we arrived." Mrs. Collins nodded thoughtfully. "Grant Xavier is a good man, one of the best in the territory, in my opinion." "He is," Katherine said simply, uncertain where the conversation was heading. Martha Collins was not one to beat around the bush. "Forgive me for being forward, Katherine, but I've observed how he looks at you. And how you look at him when you think no one notices." Katherine nearly dropped the stack of plates she was carrying. "Mrs. Collins, please call me Martha, and there's no need to deny it, dear. There's nothing improper in admitting to feelings." Katherine set the dishes down carefully, gathering her thoughts. Whatever feelings might exist, the situation is complicated. Grant made it clear when we arrived that he wasn't seeking a wife. Martha's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Men often say such things right before life proves them wrong. Especially men with wounded hearts." "He told you about Elizabeth?" Katherine asked, surprised. "Joseph treated Grant for a bullet wound the year he arrived in the territory. Fever makes men talkative," Martha explained. "But that was a decade ago, Katherine. A heart can heal in that time, especially with the right person to help it." Katherine shook her head, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Even if that were true, there's still the matter of how Rebecca and I came to be here. We were purchased, Martha, like cattle." Martha Collins's expression grew serious. "Is that how you still see it? As a purchase rather than a rescue?" The question gave Katherine pause. "No," she admitted finally. "Not anymore, but others might view it differently." "Others don't matter," Martha said firmly. "Only what you and Grant feel is important." She patted Katherine's hand. "Just something to consider, my dear. Life offers few chances for true happiness. It would be a shame to let pride stand in the way of yours." Before Katherine could respond, Rebecca and Miss Peterson returned from the garden, their arms full of late summer vegetables. The conversation shifted to preserving techniques and plans for the winter stores, but Martha's words lingered in Katherine's mind long after the visitors had departed. That evening, as she sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Katherine found herself reflecting on Martha Collins's observations. Had her feelings for Grant become so transparent? And more troublingly, was Martha right about Grant returning those feelings? Katherine had become adept at reading Grant's moods and expressions over the past months, but she had attributed his occasional intensity when looking at her to simple appreciation for her work with the children or management of the household. The idea that it might be something more personal both thrilled and terrified her. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts. Grant rode into the yard, dusty and tired from a long day with the roundup. Katherine watched as he dismounted fluidly, patted his horse's neck, and spoke quietly to Eduardo, who had ridden in with him. Even exhausted, there was a grace to his movements, a confidence that came from years of hard work and self-reliance. As Eduardo led both horses toward the barn, Grant turned toward the house. His eyes found Katherine on the porch, and he raised a hand in greeting. She returned the gesture, noticing how his face, despite the fatigue evident in every line, seemed to lighten at the sight of her. "You had visitors today," he said as he climbed the porch steps. "Thomas mentioned a former teacher from Laramie, Miss Peterson," Katherine confirmed. "She taught Rebecca and me for many years. She's on her way to Denver and stopped to visit when she learned we were nearby." Grant nodded, removing his hat and running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "I'm glad. It must have been good to see a friendly face from home. It was, Katherine agreed. The Collinses brought her. Martha sends her regards. A smile touched Grant's lips. Martha Collins is a fine woman. Salt of the earth, as they say. Her husband's the best doctor in 3 territories, but she's got healing hands of her own. She thinks very highly of you as well, Katherine said, wondering if she should mention Martha's more personal observations but deciding against it. Grant settled into the rocking chair beside her with a weary sigh. Roundup's going well. Should finish the northern section by the end of the week. Then we'll drive the cattle to market in early October. Will you be gone long? Katherine asked, trying to keep her tone casual despite the sudden hollow feeling the thought of his absence created. A week, maybe 10 days, Grant replied. Thomas is old enough to come along this year. It'll be good experience for him. They rocked in companionable silence for a time, watching as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear. Katherine, Grant said eventually, his voice thoughtful, do you ever regret coming here? The question surprised her. No, she answered honestly. Not anymore. At first, perhaps, but now. She gestured toward the ranch, the land, the night sky. This place has become home in ways Laramie never quite was. Grant nodded slowly. I'm glad. I worried in the beginning that I'd made a terrible mistake. That I'd taken you and Rebecca from everything familiar and brought you to a life you'd resent. Is that why you offered to let us leave after a month? Katherine asked. Because you thought we'd be unhappy here. Partly, Grant admitted. But also because I needed you to stay by choice, not obligation. He turned to look at her directly in the deepening twilight. I never wanted you to feel trapped, Katherine, not by the circumstances of your arrival, not by anything. The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. We don't feel trapped, Grant, quite the opposite. Rebecca has flourished here, and I. She hesitated, then continued more softly, I've found purpose here, contentment, perhaps even happiness. Something shifted in Grant's expression, a softening around the eyes, a relaxing of the perpetual vigilance he maintained. That means more to me than you know. He rose then, as if aware they were approaching territory neither was quite ready to navigate. I should clean up before supper. Cattle dust gets everywhere. Katherine nodded, understanding his retreat but feeling a new undercurrent between them, an acknowledgement, however subtle, that their relationship had evolved beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship, into something not yet defined but undeniably present. As Grant disappeared into the house, Katherine remained on the porch, her heart beating a little faster than normal, Martha Collins's words echoing in her mind. Life offers few chances for true happiness. Perhaps, Katherine thought as she finally rose to follow him inside. It was time to consider what her own happiness might look like, and whether Grant Xavier might be an essential part of that vision. October arrived with frost-tinged mornings, and the golden splendor of aspen groves turning in the higher elevations. The cattle roundup concluded successfully, and preparations for the drive to market were in full swing. Thomas, proud to be included with the men this year, spent hours practicing his roping skills under Eduardo's patient instruction. Katherine found herself increasingly aware of Grant's impending absence. Though the drive would last only days, the thought of him being away from the ranch created an anxiety she hadn't anticipated. She channeled this energy into ensuring everything at the household would run smoothly while he was gone, preserving the last of the garden harvest, organizing winter supplies, and planning lessons that would keep the children productively occupied. 3 days before the drive was scheduled to begin, a wagon arrived at the Circle X bearing a surprise visitor, Jonathan Peterson, Miss Harriet's nephew, whom Katherine remembered vaguely from Laramie as a clerk in the mercantile. "Miss James." He greeted her enthusiastically as she came out to meet the wagon. "What a pleasure to see you again," Katherine smiled politely, helping him down from the wagon. "Mr. Peterson, this is unexpected. I've escorted my aunt as far as Kingston," he explained. "She suggested I pay a call while I'm in the area. I hope it's not inconvenient." Before Katherine could respond, Rebecca appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Peterson, what a surprise!" Jonathan Peterson's face lit up at the sight of the younger James' sister. "Miss Rebecca, you're looking well, very well indeed." Katherine noticed the man's particular attention to her sister with interest. At 27, Jonathan Peterson was a respectable if somewhat unremarkable man, medium height, pleasant features, and the careful manner of someone who counted inventory for a living. "Please, come inside," Katherine invited. "Rebecca has just made fresh coffee." As they settled in the main room, Peterson explained his presence in more detail. "I've been considering a move to Kingston myself, actually. The mercantile here is for sale, and the owner is willing to take me on as a partner initially with an option to buy him out entirely in a few years." "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity," Rebecca commented, serving coffee with a grace that Katherine noted seemed to captivate their visitor. "It could be," Peterson agreed. "Kingston is growing. A well-stocked mercantile would do good business." He glanced around the ranch house appreciatively. "This is a fine establishment. Mr. Xavier must be a successful rancher." "The Circle X is one of the largest spreads in the county," Katherine acknowledged. "Mr. Xavier has worked hard to build it. And you ladies are employees here?" Peterson asked, a slight furrow appearing between his brows. Katherine tensed, unsure how to explain their unusual circumstances, but Rebecca answered smoothly. "We teach the children and manage the household. It's a very satisfactory arrangement." Peterson nodded, though Katherine could see curiosity and perhaps concern in his expression. "I was distressed to hear of your father's passing and the difficulties that followed. My aunt was quite worried about you both." The reference to the auction, however delicately phrased, caused Katherine to stiffen slightly. "As you can see, Mr. Peterson, we've landed on our feet. The children here needed education and we needed a fresh start. It's worked out well for everyone." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Grant, who had been working with the hands to prepare the herd for the upcoming drive. He entered the main room still wearing his work clothes, dust clinging to his boots and trousers. "Katherine, he stopped short at the sight of their visitor. "Pardon me, I didn't realize we had company." Katherine made the introductions, watching as the two men sized each other up. Grant was cordial but reserved, his manner more formal than usual. Peterson seemed simultaneously intimidated and determined to hold his ground. "Mr. Peterson is considering purchasing the Kingston mercantile," Katherine explained. "He's Miss Harriet's nephew from Laramie." "Is that so?" Grant's expression revealed nothing. "Kingston could use a good mercantile. The current owner is ready to retire." Peterson nodded eagerly. "That's my understanding as well. I've managed my uncle's store in Laramie for 5 years now. I believe I could make a success of the Kingston establishment." The conversation continued politely, but with an undercurrent of tension that Katherine couldn't quite identify. Grant remained standing throughout, his posture suggesting he was ready to depart at any moment. Peterson, perhaps sensing this, eventually rose to take his leave. "I should return to Kingston before dark," he said. "Miss Katherine, Miss Rebecca, it's been a pleasure seeing you both again. Perhaps you might consider visiting Kingston during my stay. I'm at the hotel through the end of the week." Rebecca smiled warmly. "That would be lovely, wouldn't it, Katie?" Katherine, aware of Grant's silent presence beside her, nodded. Perhaps we could come in for church on Sunday. The children enjoy the services, and we could show you the schoolhouse afterward. This compromise seemed to satisfy Peterson, who took his leave with particular attention to Rebecca. As his wagon disappeared down the road toward Kingston, Grant turned to Katherine with an unreadable expression. "Friend of yours from Laramie?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Acquaintance only," Katherine clarified. "He worked at the general store where we sometimes shopped. I barely remember him, truthfully." Grant nodded once. "He seems particularly interested in renewing the acquaintance." Rebecca laughed lightly. "I think his interest is more specific than that, Grant. He hardly took his eyes off Katherine the entire visit." "Rebecca," Katherine protested, feeling her cheeks warm. "That's not true at all. If anything, he seemed more attentive to you." Grant's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, regardless, it's good that you both have connections from Laramie. Makes the world seem smaller." He gestured vaguely toward the barn. "I should get back to work. Plenty to do before the drive." As he strode away, Rebecca turned to Katherine with raised eyebrows. "Well, that was interesting." "What do you mean?" Katherine asked, though she suspected she knew exactly what her sister was implying. "Grant Xavier doesn't appreciate Jonathan Peterson's attention to either of us," Rebecca stated bluntly. "Though I think we both know which of us he's concerned about." Katherine shook her head, unwilling to indulge such speculation. "Grant is simply protective. He feels responsible for us." "Is that all it is?" Rebecca pressed gently. "Because from where I stand, it looked remarkably like jealousy." "Don't be ridiculous," Katherine replied, more sharply than she intended. "Grant has made it perfectly clear he has no interest in romantic entanglements. He views us as employees, perhaps friends at most." Rebecca's expression softened. "Katie, I've watched the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is observing. That's not how an employer looks at an employee." Katherine felt her heart quicken despite her determination to remain practical. "Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, the circumstances of our arrangement make any deeper relationship complicated." "Life is complicated," Rebecca said simply. "That doesn't mean we should deny ourselves happiness when it presents itself." Before Katherine could respond, the younger children burst in from outside, eager to tell Rebecca about a rabbit they'd spotted near the garden. The moment for such personal conversation passed, but Rebecca's words lingered in Katherine's mind throughout the evening. At supper that night, Grant was unusually quiet, responding to the children's chatter with brief answers and spending most of the meal seemingly lost in thought. Katherine found herself watching him surreptitiously, wondering what was behind his preoccupation. Was it merely the upcoming cattle drive, or had Jonathan Peterson's visit disturbed him for reasons she dared not fully examine? After the children were in bed, Katherine found herself alone in the kitchen, finishing the last of the dishes. The sound of the door opening made her turn to find Grant standing in the doorway, his expression serious. "May I speak with you, Katherine?" he asked. "Of course," she replied, drying her hands on a towel. "Is something wrong?" Grant entered the kitchen fully but remained standing, his posture suggesting uncharacteristic uncertainty. "Not wrong exactly, but there's something I need to say before I leave for the cattle drive." Katherine's pulse quickened. "Yes. I want you to know that you're free to make whatever choices feel right to you." The words came out formally, almost rehearsed. "If Jonathan Peterson or any other man from your past represents an opportunity you wish to pursue, you should feel no obligation to remain at the Circle X." Katherine stared at him in astonishment. "What are you talking about?" Grant ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "I'm trying to say that I don't want you to feel bound here, by gratitude or obligation or anything else. If there's a life you'd prefer in Kingston or elsewhere, with someone like Peterson, Grant Xavier, Katherine interrupted, a mixture of amusement and exasperation in her voice. Are you trying to give me permission to court Jonathan Peterson? Grant's expression tightened. I'm trying to ensure you know that your choices are your own. I purchased your father's debt, Katherine, not your future. The sentiment was so similar to what he'd said on their first meeting that Katherine felt a surge of affection for this complicated man. I'm well aware of that, she said softly, and I appreciate your concern, but I have absolutely no interest in Jonathan Peterson or any other man from Laramie. Something flickered in Grant's eyes, relief perhaps, or something more complex. I see. Do you? Katherine asked, taking a step closer to him. Because I'm beginning to think there are things neither of us is seeing clearly. Grant remained still, watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. Such as, Katherine took a deep breath, Martha Collins's advice echoing in her mind. Such as the fact that what began as an unusual business arrangement has become something else entirely. The children view Rebecca and me as family now, and I. She hesitated, then continued with quiet determination. I've come to care deeply for everyone at the Circle X, including you, Grant. Perhaps especially you. The silence that followed her declaration seemed to stretch endlessly. Grant's expression shifted through a range of emotions: surprise, uncertainty, and something that looked remarkably like hope. Katherine, he began, his voice rougher than usual. I never intended, I know, she interrupted gently. Neither did I. But intentions don't always govern what happens to our hearts. Grant took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Katherine smiled, finding courage in his obvious vulnerability. I'm saying that I've found much more than employment at the Circle X. I've found a home, a family, and feelings I wasn't looking for but can no longer deny. Grant reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, and took her hand in his. I told myself I wouldn't do this, he said softly. That it wouldn't be right, given how you came here, that you deserved better than a rough rancher with a complicated past. Shouldn't I be the judge of what I deserve? Katherine asked, her fingers tightening around his. A smile touched Grant's lips. You always have been one to speak your mind, Miss James. And you've always been one to listen, Mr. Xavier. It's one of the things I admire most about you. Grant's free hand moved to gently touch her cheek. There are many things I admire about you, Katherine, more than I could possibly list. The tenderness in his touch, the warmth in his eyes made Katherine's breath catch. This moment, so long unacknowledged between them, felt both surprising and inevitable. When I return from the cattle drive, Grant said, his voice low and serious, we should talk properly about what this means. For us, for the children, for the future. Katherine nodded, understanding his need to proceed carefully. I'll be here waiting. Grant hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed his lips gently to her forehead, a gesture of such restrained affection that Katherine felt tears spring to her eyes. 10 days, he promised. Then we'll see where this path leads us. As he stepped back, the loss of his nearness left Katherine feeling both bereft and expectant. Something fundamental had changed between them, a boundary crossed, a possibility acknowledged. Whatever came next, there would be no returning to the careful distance they had maintained these past months. Be safe, she said simply. Grant nodded, his eyes holding hers for one more moment before he turned and left the kitchen. Katherine remained where she was, her heart full of newfound hope and the promise of a future she had never dared imagine, one where the unusual circumstances that had brought her to the Circle X might lead to a happiness greater than any she had known before. The morning of the cattle drive dawned clear and cool, the ranch bustling with activity well before sunrise. Katherine rose early to ensure a hearty breakfast for Grant, Thomas, and the hands who would be making the journey to the railhead 50 miles south. Rebecca and the younger children helped as they could, excitement pervading the household despite the early hour. Grant moved through preparations with his usual efficiency, giving final instructions to Eduardo, who would remain behind to manage the ranch in his absence. Katherine noticed how he took a moment with each child, offering Thomas words of encouragement, assuring the younger boys they would have responsibilities at home, and kneeling to promise Sarah he would return with a special gift. When the time came for departure, the entire household gathered in the yard to see them off. The cattle, nearly 200 head, were already moving south under Joe and Frank's guidance, while Grant, Thomas, Charlie, and a temporary hand named Bill prepared to follow. "Remember what I told you," Grant said to Eduardo. "If there's any trouble, send word to Kingston immediately." The seasoned ranch hand nodded. "Don't worry, boss. We'll keep things running smooth." Grant turned to Katherine and Rebecca. "I've left money in the desk drawer if you need supplies from town. And Eduardo knows where the rifle is kept, just in case." "We'll be fine," Katherine assured him, trying to hide the concern she felt. Cattle drives, even relatively short ones, carried inherent dangers: stampedes, river crossings, encounters with less savory characters along the trail. Grant nodded, then said more quietly, for her ears alone, 10 days, Katherine. No more if I can help it." The private reminder of their conversation the previous night brought warmth to her cheeks. "We'll be waiting." With final goodbyes, the men mounted up. Thomas sat tall in his saddle, trying to emulate Grant's easy confidence despite his obvious nervousness. As they rode away, Sarah slipped her small hand into Katherine's. "Papa Grant will come back, won't he?" she asked, her solemn eyes tracking the departing riders. Katherine squeezed the child's hand. "Of course he will, sweetheart. He always keeps his promises." The first days after the men's departure passed in a blur of routine activities. Katherine maintained regular lessons for the children, while Rebecca managed the household with Anna's assistance. Eduardo and the remaining hand, Miguel, handled the essential ranch work, checking on the remaining cattle and maintaining equipment. On Sunday, as promised, they all traveled to Kingston for church services. Jonathan Peterson was waiting outside the small white church, his face lighting up at the sight of the Circle X wagon. "Miss James, Miss Rebecca, I was hoping you'd come today," he greeted them, helping first Rebecca, then Katherine down from the wagon. "We always attend Sunday services when possible," Katherine replied politely. "Mr. Peterson, you remember Anna, Michael, James, and Sarah?" Peterson acknowledged the children somewhat distractedly, his attention clearly focused on the sisters. Throughout the service, he sat beside Rebecca, occasionally leaning closer to whisper comments that made her smile. Katherine observed this interaction with mild interest, noting that her sister seemed to enjoy Peterson's attentions. After church, as the congregation gathered on the steps for conversation, Martha Collins approached Katherine with a knowing smile. "I see Jonathan Peterson has found his way to Kingston," she observed, "and seems quite taken with your sister." Katherine nodded. "So it appears." He mentioned interest in purchasing the mercantile. "Yes, he's been in discussions with old Mr. Harrison all week," Martha confirmed. "A good match for the business from what Joseph has heard." She paused, her eyes twinkling. "And perhaps a good match in other ways as well." Katherine followed Martha's gaze to where Rebecca and Peterson were engaged in animated conversation. "Perhaps. Rebecca deserves happiness." "As do you, my dear," Martha said gently. "Has there been any?" Development in the matter we discussed during my last visit. Katherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Grant and I spoke briefly before he left for the cattle drive. He said we would talk more upon his return. Martha's face lit with genuine pleasure. I knew it. Joseph said I was meddling unnecessarily, but I told him some people need a little nudge toward their own happiness. It's still very new, Katherine cautioned, and complicated given our situation. Nonsense, Martha dismissed with a wave of her hand. The circumstances of your arrival are long past relevant. What matters is what you feel for each other now. She patted Katherine's arm. Trust an old woman who has observed many marriages, both successful and otherwise. When two people look at each other the way you and Grant do, complications have a way of resolving themselves. Before Katherine could respond, Peterson approached with Rebecca. Miss Katherine, he said, I've invited your sister to join me for luncheon at the hotel. Mrs. Collins has kindly offered to include the children in her family's meal after church. I was hoping you might join us as well. Katherine hesitated, looking to the children. That's very kind, but I shouldn't impose on Mrs. Collins. It's no imposition at all, Martha insisted. In fact, I insist. The children will enjoy playing with my grandchildren, and you young people should have some time to catch up. Thus arranged, Katherine found herself seated in the small but respectable dining room of the Kingston Hotel alongside Rebecca and Jonathan Peterson. The man was clearly nervous, repeatedly adjusting his neatly knotted tie and smoothing his already immaculate hair. I've received favorable responses from the bank regarding my proposal to purchase the mercantile, he announced after they had ordered. It seems my prospects in Kingston are quite promising. That's wonderful news, Rebecca responded warmly. Kingston is growing rapidly. A well-run mercantile would be an asset to the community. Peterson beamed at her approval. My thoughts exactly, and living in Kingston would be. Well, it would mean being near friends. His gaze lingered on Rebecca meaningfully. Katherine watched this exchange with growing certainty that Peterson's interest was firmly fixed on her sister rather than herself, despite Rebecca's earlier teasing. The realization brought relief. She had no desire to discourage a suitor, especially one who might offer Rebecca a chance at her own household and family. As the meal progressed, Peterson grew increasingly bold in his attentions to Rebecca, while politely including Katherine in the conversation. He spoke of his plans for the mercantile, his modest savings that would allow him to purchase a small house in town, and his hope of becoming a respected businessman in the growing community. Of course, he said, lowering his voice slightly, I understand your current situation is somewhat unusual. But should either of you wish for a more conventional arrangement, I want you to know there would be opportunities in Kingston. Katherine recognized the carefully phrased offer for what it was, a suggestion that the sisters need not remain at the Circle X if they preferred a different life. Before she could formulate a diplomatic response, Rebecca spoke up. That's very thoughtful, Mr. Peterson. But I believe both Katherine and I are quite content with our current positions. The children need us, and we've grown fond of the ranch. Peterson nodded, though Katherine could see disappointment in his eyes. Of course. I merely wanted to ensure you knew there were options. Sometimes arrangements that begin in unusual circumstances can become difficult to leave, even when one might wish to. I assure you, Katherine said firmly, we remain at the Circle X entirely by choice. Grant Xavier has been nothing but honorable and fair in all his dealings with us. I'm relieved to hear it, Peterson replied, though something in his tone suggested lingering doubt. Your aunt was quite concerned about the circumstances under which you left Laramie. Rebecca's expression cooled slightly. What happened in Laramie was unfortunate, but it led us to a better situation than we could have hoped for. We're not in need of rescue, Mr. Peterson." Her direct response seemed to startle the man, who quickly backpedaled. Of course. I meant no offense. I simply wanted to offer my friendship and assistance should it ever be required." The remainder of the meal passed pleasantly enough, though a slight tension lingered. As they were preparing to leave, Peterson addressed Rebecca specifically. "Miss Rebecca, I wonder if I might call on you again before I return to Laramie. Perhaps Wednesday afternoon. I must make my final decision about the mercantile by the end of the week, and I would value your opinion on some matters." Rebecca glanced at Katherine, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "That would be fine, Mr. Peterson. Though I'm not sure how much assistance I can offer regarding business matters." "Your perspective would be invaluable," he assured her, his expression brightening considerably. As they collected the children from the Collins home and began the journey back to the ranch, Katherine noticed Rebecca's thoughtful expression. "Mr. Peterson seems quite taken with you," she observed once the children were occupied with a game in the back of the wagon. Rebecca smiled slightly. "He's a kind man, reliable, not exciting perhaps, but steady." "Are you considering his interest?" Katherine asked carefully. Rebecca sighed. "I'm not dismissing it. He would offer stability, a comfortable home. The mercantile would provide a good living." She glanced at her sister. "But I'm not sure if that's enough. Not after seeing what's possible between two people who truly care for each other." Katherine knew immediately what her sister meant. "Grant and I have something special," Rebecca finished for her. "Don't deny it, Katie. I've watched it grow between you these past months." She smiled, reaching over to squeeze Katherine's hand. "And I'm happy for you, truly. You deserve someone who sees your strength and values your mind as much as your heart." Katherine felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you, but what about you? Don't you deserve the same?" Rebecca looked thoughtfully at the landscape passing by. "I do. And perhaps Jonathan Peterson could grow to be that person, or perhaps there's someone else in my future I haven't met yet." She shrugged. "I'm only 19, Katie. There's time yet to decide my path." The wisdom in her younger sister's words struck Katherine deeply. Rebecca had matured significantly during their months at the Circle X, developing a self-assurance and clarity of thought that made Katherine immensely proud. True to his word, Jonathan Peterson arrived at the Circle X the following Wednesday afternoon. He came in a rented buggy, dressed in his Sunday best despite the ordinary weekday, and bearing small gifts, candies for the children, and a modest bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers for Rebecca. Katherine ensured the younger children were occupied with lessons, giving Rebecca and Peterson privacy for their conversation. From the window of the schoolroom, she watched them walk toward the creek, Peterson gesturing animatedly as he spoke, Rebecca listening with polite attention. They returned an hour later, Rebecca's expression thoughtful but composed. Peterson took his leave with formal correctness, promising to write once he returned to Laramie. "Well?" Katherine asked when they were alone in the kitchen preparing supper. Rebecca shaped a biscuit with careful fingers before responding. "He's purchasing the mercantile. He'll return to Laramie to settle his affairs, then move to Kingston permanently after the new year." "And," Katherine prompted gently, "and he asked if he might court me properly once he's established here." Rebecca placed the biscuit on the baking sheet and reached for more dough. "I told him I would consider it." Katherine waited, sensing there was more. "He's a good man, Katie," Rebecca continued after a moment. "Kind, responsible, with reasonable prospects. Mother would have approved." "But," Katherine could hear the reservation in her sister's voice. Rebecca sighed. "But I don't feel anything special when he speaks to me. No quickening of the heart, no sense that this person understands me in a way others don't." She looked directly at her sister, Not what I see between you and Grant." Katherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Rebecca, don't deny it," her sister said firmly. "I have eyes, Katherine. And I want that kind of connection, or at least the possibility of it, before I commit my future to someone." Katherine nodded, understanding completely. "Then you were right to tell him you'd consider his suit rather than accepting outright. Give yourself time." "That's what I thought," Rebecca agreed. "And who knows? Perhaps when he returns I'll see him differently, or perhaps by then I'll have met someone else who makes me feel the way Grant makes you feel." Katherine couldn't argue with her sister's perceptiveness. Instead, she changed the subject slightly. "Speaking of Grant, they should be returning soon. The drive was scheduled for 10 days, and it's been 8 already." Eduardo said everything was likely going smoothly, since we've had no messages to the contrary, Rebecca noted. "Though I know you'll feel better when they're all safely home." "We all will," Katherine corrected. "Especially with Thomas on his first drive. The children miss them both terribly." As if to prove her point, Sarah wandered into the kitchen at that moment, her small face solemn. "Is Papa Grant coming home today?" Katherine lifted the child onto a stool beside the work table. "Not today, sweetheart, but soon. Would you like to help cut these biscuits?" Sarah nodded, her expression brightening at the offered task. As Katherine guided the child's small hands, she realized how seamlessly she had adapted to this role: part teacher, part mother figure, part household manager. What had begun as an arrangement born of necessity had evolved into something that felt remarkably like family. And at the center of it all was Grant Xavier, the man who had purchased her father's debt, but offered her freedom, who had given her responsibility, but respected her autonomy, who had gradually revealed himself to be far more complex and honorable than she could have imagined on that terrible day in Laramie. 10 days, he had promised, and then they would talk about what might come next. Katherine found herself both terrified and exhilarated by the possibilities that conversation might hold. The 10th day dawned with a heavy fog that gradually burned away to reveal a gloriously clear autumn day. Katherine found herself distracted during lessons, her gaze repeatedly drawn to the window that offered a view of the road from Kingston. The children were similarly restless, aware that this was the day Grant and Thomas should return. By mid-afternoon, with still no sign of the returning party, Katherine suggested the children help gather the last of the season's apples from the small orchard behind the house, an activity that would keep them occupied outdoors where they might spot the approaching riders first. She was in the kitchen preparing to turn the apples into pies when Eduardo appeared at the door, his expression tense. "Miss Katherine, riders coming, not ours." Katherine immediately set aside her work, wiping her hands on her apron. "How many? 3, don't recognize them." Eduardo's hand rested on the knife at his belt. "Might be nothing, but better to be cautious," Katherine finished for him. "Where are the children?" "Still in the orchard with Miss Rebecca." "Miguel is with them." Katherine nodded. "Keep them there until we know who our visitors are." "And Eduardo, the rifle." "Already brought it inside," he assured her. "It's by the door." Katherine felt a rush of gratitude for the loyal hand's foresight. Though the Wyoming Territory had grown more civilized in recent years, remote ranches were still occasional targets for desperate or unsavory characters. With most of the men away on the cattle drive, the Circle X might appear vulnerable. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and Katherine moved to the window, careful to stay partially hidden by the curtain as she observed the approaching riders. 3 men on tired-looking horses rode into the yard, their appearance rough, but not immediately threatening. The leader, a weathered man in his 40s with a graying beard, dismounted first. The other 2 remained on horseback, scanning the ranch buildings with what Katherine recognized as professional wariness. Eduardo stepped onto the porch, his stance casual but alert. "Help you, gentlemen." The bearded man touched the brim of his hat. "Afternoon. We're looking for Grant Xavier. This the Circle X." "It is," Eduardo confirmed without offering more information. "Name's Dawson. Marshal Jim Dawson from Cheyenne." The man reached slowly into his vest and produced a badge. "These are my deputies. We need to speak with Xavier on official business." Katherine felt a chill run through her. A marshal from Cheyenne, looking for Grant. What could possibly bring law enforcement so far from their usual jurisdiction? She stepped onto the porch beside Eduardo. "Marshal Dawson, I'm Katherine James, the teacher here. Mr. Xavier is away on a cattle drive. He's expected back today or tomorrow." The marshal studied her with shrewd eyes. "Madam, you work for Xavier." "I teach the children in his care and help manage the household," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite her growing unease. Dawson nodded. "Any idea exactly when he'll return or which route he's taking back from the railhead?" "The southern route most likely," Eduardo answered before Katherine could respond. "But hard to say for certain. Depends on how the sale went, whether they needed to stop in Kingston." The marshal seemed to consider this information. "Mind if we water our horses and rest a spell?" "Been riding since dawn." Katherine hesitated, torn between hospitality and caution. "Of course. Eduardo can show you to the trough. I'll have coffee ready if you'd like to come inside afterward." "Much obliged, madam." Dawson turned to his deputies. "Jackson, stay with the horses. Cooper with me." As Eduardo led the men toward the barn, Katherine hurried back inside, her mind racing. What business could a marshal from Cheyenne possibly have with Grant? In all their months at the Circle X, she had never seen any indication that Grant was involved in anything illegal or questionable. She quickly prepared coffee, her hands working automatically while her thoughts tumbled over each other. By the time the marshal and his deputy entered the house, she had composed herself outwardly, though anxiety still churned within. "Please, sit down," she invited, indicating the dining table. "The coffee will be ready shortly." "May I ask what business brings you to the Circle X, Marshal?" Dawson settled his substantial frame onto a chair, his deputy taking a position near the door. "Nothing to concern yourself with, madam. Just need to ask Xavier some questions about an old matter." "An old matter?" Katherine pressed gently as she poured coffee into mugs. The marshal accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Yes, madam. From before his time in Wyoming Territory." This surprised Katherine. "You've come all the way from Cheyenne about something that happened over 10 years ago." A slight smile touched Dawson's weather-beaten face. "You seem protective of your employer, Miss James." Katherine met his gaze directly. "Mr. Xavier is a respected rancher and a good man who has taken in 5 orphan children. Whatever questions you have about his past, I can assure you he's lived an exemplary life here." "I don't doubt it," Dawson replied, his tone softening slightly. "And I'm not here to cause trouble, Miss James. Just need to clear up some details about an incident in Missouri right after the war." Before Katherine could inquire further, the sound of horses approaching at speed drew everyone's attention. Eduardo appeared in the doorway, his expression relieved. "It's them," he announced. "Mr. Xavier and the others returning from the drive." Katherine's heart leapt at the news, though her relief was immediately tempered by concern about the marshal's presence. She moved to the window, watching as Grant, Thomas, and the other hands rode into the yard, dusty and tired but intact. Grant dismounted with his usual fluid grace, then froze as he spotted the unfamiliar horses. His hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm before Eduardo approached him, speaking rapidly and gesturing toward the house. Katherine saw Grant's posture change as he absorbed whatever information Eduardo was providing. His shoulders straightened, his chin lifted, and he handed his reins to Thomas before striding purposefully toward the house. When he entered, his eyes found Katherine first, a silent question in their blue depths. She gave a small nod to indicate she was all right, watching as his gaze then shifted to the lawman at her table. "Marshal Dawson," Grant greeted the older man with apparent recognition. "It's been a long time." Dawson stood, extending his hand. "Xavier, didn't expect you to remember me." "Hard to forget the man who pulled me out of that burning saloon in Independence," Grant replied, shaking the offered hand. "What brings you to my ranch after all these years?" Katherine watched this exchange with surprise. Clearly, there was history between these men that Grant had never mentioned. "Official business, I'm afraid," Dawson said, his expression growing serious. "Though not the kind you might be thinking. Could we speak privately?" Grant nodded. "My office is through here." He turned to Katherine. "Would you check on Thomas? Make sure he gets cleaned up and fed. The drive was successful, but he's exhausted." Katherine recognized the request for what it was, both a genuine concern for Thomas and a way to remove her from whatever discussion was about to take place. "Of course. I'll see to the others as well." As she left the house, she couldn't help but worry about what business the marshal might have with Grant. Despite her confidence in his character, the fact remained that there were parts of his past she knew little about: the years immediately following the war, how he had come to Wyoming Territory, what experiences had shaped the man he had become. The next hour passed in a flurry of activity as the returning men were fed, and the cattle drive's success was celebrated. Thomas regaled the younger children with tales of their journey, his exhaustion temporarily forgotten in the excitement of sharing his adventure. Rebecca managed the kitchen with Anna's help, ensuring everyone was properly fed after their long journey. Katherine participated in these activities while keeping one eye on the main house, waiting for some indication of what was transpiring between Grant and the marshal. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the door opened, and the lawman emerged with Grant. To her immense relief, the atmosphere seemed cordial. Grant and Dawson shook hands again, and the marshal even smiled as he mounted his horse. "We'll be in Kingston tonight if you need anything further," Dawson called as they prepared to depart. "And Xavier, congratulations. It's not often a case resolves this way." Grant nodded acknowledgement but said nothing as the three lawmen rode away. Katherine approached him cautiously, uncertain of his mood after this mysterious meeting. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly. Grant turned to her, and to her surprise, a smile broke across his face, broader and more unrestrained than any she had seen from him before. "Better than all right, Katherine, much better." "The marshal wasn't here to arrest you then?" she asked, only half joking. Grant actually laughed. "No, quite the opposite, in fact." He glanced around at the busy yard. "But it's a long story and one I'd prefer to tell when we have some privacy." Katherine nodded, understanding. "The children will be occupied for a while with Thomas's stories. Perhaps we could walk down to the creek." "Perfect," Grant agreed. They walked in companionable silence until they reached the creek bank, where they had first spoken honestly about their feelings the day before the cattle drive. The water flowed more slowly now than during the summer months, its surface reflecting the golden light of late afternoon. Grant stood for a moment watching the creek before turning to Katherine. "I owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything," she countered. "But I would like to understand what brought a marshal from Cheyenne to the Circle X." Grant nodded, gathering his thoughts. "After the war, before I came west, I was briefly in Missouri. It was a bad time. The state had been torn apart by guerrilla fighting, and law and order were tenuous at best." Katherine listened attentively, knowing how rarely Grant spoke of this period in his life. I was in a town called Liberty, working as a freight driver. There was a bank robbery, a violent one. 3 people killed. Grant's expression darkened at the memory. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right place, depending on how you look at it. I managed to stop one of the robbers as they fled, but was shot in the process. Katherine gasped softly. That's where the scar on your side comes from. She had noticed it once when he was working shirtless in the summer heat, a puckered mark just below his ribs. Grant nodded. In the confusion, with multiple shooters and victims, there was a mistake. A witness claimed I was part of the robbery gang. I was badly wounded, barely conscious. By the time I was well enough to defend myself, the real robber I'd stopped had died of his wounds, and I was facing a murder charge for one of the bank victims. But that's horrible, Katherine exclaimed. Surely there were other witnesses who saw what really happened. It was chaos, Katherine. And I was an outsider, a former Union soldier in a town with Confederate sympathies. He shrugged. Marshal Dawson was investigating a string of similar robberies. He believed my story but couldn't prove my innocence. The best he could do was help me escape before trial. He helped you escape. Katherine was astonished. But he's a lawman. A good one, Grant confirmed. One who cares more about justice than the letter of the law. He told me to head west, start fresh, stay honest. Said he'd keep investigating, try to clear my name. Understanding dawned on Katherine. And that's what he came to tell you today, that you've been exonerated. A smile broke across Grant's face again. Yes, they caught the real killer 3 months ago in Colorado, a man named Harlow who was part of the original gang. Before he was hanged for another murder, he confessed to several robberies, including Liberty. His description of events matched my account exactly. Oh, Grant, Katherine felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. That's wonderful news. It's more than that, Katherine. He took her hands in his. It means I'm finally free of the past. For 10 years, I've lived with the knowledge that I was a wanted man, that at any moment my life here could be destroyed if the wrong person recognized me or asked too many questions. The magnitude of what he was saying struck Katherine fully. That's why you've kept to yourself all these years. Why you rarely go into Kingston or larger towns. Grant nodded. It became habit after a while. Easier to avoid complications by staying at the ranch, focusing on building something here. His grip on her hands tightened slightly. But it also meant I couldn't consider a future that might bring scrutiny, a wife, a family of my own rather than just taking in orphans. Katherine's heart beat faster at his words. And now, Grant said, his voice dropping to a gentler tone, I can finally think about what I truly want for my future, who I want to share it with. He released one of her hands to gently touch her cheek. I meant what I said before I left, Katherine. These past months, watching you with the children, seeing your strength and kindness, your intelligence and determination. I've come to care for you in ways I never expected, in ways I told myself I had no right to feel. Katherine leaned slightly into his touch. I've come to care for you too, Grant, very deeply. Even knowing how we met, the circumstances that brought you here. There was vulnerability in his question, a lingering doubt. Especially knowing that, Katherine replied firmly, you gave me and Rebecca choices when we had none. You treated us with respect when others would have taken advantage. You created a home for those children when they had nowhere to go. She smiled up at him. How could I not come to love a man like that? Grant stilled at her words. Love, he repeated, wonder in his voice. Katherine hadn't planned to use that word, but now that it had escaped, she knew it was true. Yes, Grant, I love you, not despite how we met, but because of everything that's happened since. For a moment, he simply looked at her, his blue eyes filled with an emotion so powerful it took her breath away. Then, with gentle deliberation, he drew her closer and lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was tentative at first, as if he was giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Katherine had no desire to retreat. She responded with all the feeling that had built within her over these months, her arms encircling his neck as his wrapped around her waist. When they finally parted, both somewhat breathless, Grant rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too, Katherine James, more than I thought possible." She smiled, joy bubbling up within her. "So what happens now?" Grant straightened slightly, though he kept her within the circle of his arms. "That depends on what you want." "I know what I want to make our arrangement permanent, to build a true family with you, Rebecca, and the children. But I need to know if that's what you want too." "Are you proposing marriage, Grant Xavier?" Katherine asked, a teasing note in her voice despite the seriousness of the moment. He laughed softly. "Not very romantically, it seems. But yes, Katherine, I'm asking you to be my wife, to be a mother to those children who already love you, to build a future at the Circle X together." Katherine pretended to consider, though her heart already knew the answer. "I accept on one condition." Grant raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "That you understand you're getting Rebecca as part of the bargain, at least until she decides her own path. She's my family, just as those children are yours." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Grant assured her. "This ranch has room for all of us, you, me, Rebecca, the children, however many more might come along." A hint of mischief entered his eyes at this last suggestion. Katherine felt her cheeks warm but met his gaze steadily. "Then yes, Grant Xavier, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he pulled her close for another kiss, this one deeper and more certain than the first. Katherine gave herself over to the moment, to the joy of finding love in the most unexpected of circumstances. When they finally turned back toward the ranch house, hand in hand, the setting sun painted the buildings in golden light. Katherine thought of that first day, arriving tired and frightened with Rebecca beside her, having no idea what awaited them at the Circle X. "What will we tell the children?" she asked as they neared the house. Grant considered this. "The truth, I think, that we love each other and want to make our family official. And Rebecca, also the truth. That I hope she'll continue to consider the Circle X her home for as long as she wishes, whether that's until she decides to marry or forever if she chooses." Katherine squeezed his hand gratefully. "You're a good man, Grant Xavier." "I'm trying to be," he replied simply. "And with you beside me, I think I might succeed." As they approached the porch, the front door burst open, and Sarah ran out, followed more sedately by the other children and Rebecca. "Papa Grant," the little girl cried, launching herself into his arms. "Thomas said you sold all the cows and got lots of money," Grant laughed, lifting her easily. "Not all the cows, little one, just the ones we could spare. And yes, the sale went well." Thomas approached next, still proudly wearing the hat Grant had given him for the drive. "Eduardo said marshals came. Is everything all right?" Grant nodded, shifting Sarah to one arm so he could place his other hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Everything is more than all right. In fact, I have news to share with all of you." He glanced at Katherine, who nodded encouragingly. "Let's go inside," he suggested. "This is something we should discuss as a family." The word family resonated through Katherine's heart as they all filed into the main room. Rebecca caught her eye, raising a questioning eyebrow at their clasped hands. Katherine gave her a small, confirming smile that made her sister's face light up with understanding. Once everyone was settled, the children on the floor or perched on chairs, Rebecca on the sofa, Grant standing by the fireplace with Katherine beside him, he cleared his throat. "I have 2 pieces of news to share. First, some of you know I've had legal troubles from before I came to Wyoming. Today, Marshal Dawson brought word that I've been fully cleared. Those troubles are behind me for good. Eduardo, who apparently knew at least some of Grant's history, nodded in satisfaction. Thomas looked confused but pleased, while the younger children seemed uncertain why this was important. The second piece of news, Grant continued, taking Catherine's hand, is that I've asked Miss Katherine to marry me, and she said yes. There was a moment of stunned silence followed by an eruption of responses. Sarah clapped her hands in delight while the boys bombarded them with questions. Anna burst into tears, though her smile indicated they were happy ones. Eduardo grinned broadly, and Rebecca rushed forward to embrace her sister. "Does this mean you'll be our mother now?" Sarah asked Katherine, her small face earnest. Katherine knelt to the child's level. "It means I'll officially be part of your family. I'll still be your teacher, but yes, I would be honored to be like a mother to you all if you'll have me." Sarah threw her arms around Katherine's neck. "I've been wishing for this," she whispered. Over the child's head, Katherine met Grant's gaze, seeing in his eyes the same wonder and gratitude she felt. What had begun as the darkest day of her life standing on that auction block beside her sister had led, through an unlikely path, to a happiness greater than she could have imagined. As the excitement continued around them, Rebecca approached Grant. "Congratulations," she said warmly. "You're getting an exceptional woman for your wife." "I know," he agreed sincerely. "And I want you to know, Rebecca, that this is still your home too, for as long as you want it to be." Rebecca smiled. "Thank you, though I suspect Mr. Peterson might have other ideas when he returns from Laramie after the new year." "You're considering his suit, then?" Katherine asked, joining them with Sarah still clinging to her side. "Perhaps," Rebecca admitted. "He's coming to Kingston permanently, after all, and while I'm not certain yet, I think there might be potential there worth exploring." "Whatever you decide," Grant assured her, "you'll always have a place at the Circle X, your family now." The simple declaration brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. "That means more than you know." As the evening progressed into a spontaneous celebration, Rebecca and Anna quickly organizing a special supper, the boys running to tell the ranch hands the news, Sarah refusing to leave Katherine's side, Grant and Katherine found a brief moment alone in the kitchen. "Happy?" he asked softly, his arms encircling her waist. Katherine nodded, leaning into his embrace. "More than I ever thought possible, when I think of where Rebecca and I were just months ago." "I know," Grant agreed. "Life takes strange turns." "When I rode into Laramie that day, I was looking for a teacher and housekeeper. I never expected to find the woman who would change everything." Katherine turned in his arms to face him. "For both of us, it seems. You gave us a home when we needed one most. And now—" "Now," Grant finished, his eyes warm with promise, "we'll build that home together, for as long as we both shall live." The simple vow, spoken in the busy kitchen of the ranch house, with the sounds of their unconventional family celebrating around them, felt more binding to Katherine than any formal ceremony could. From the most desperate of beginnings had grown the most hopeful of futures, a life built on respect and care that had blossomed into love. As Grant lowered his lips to hers once more, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged at the Circle X ranch, with the man who had seen her value when she stood on that auction block, and who now held her heart as tenderly as he held their shared future. Epilogue, Spring 1876. The wildflowers painted the Wyoming landscape in vibrant purples and yellows as Grant Xavier stood on the porch of the Circle X ranch house, one hand resting lightly on her slightly rounded belly. 6 months had passed since her winter wedding to Grant, a joyous celebration in Kingston's small church. attended by the entire community and presided over by a visibly delighted Reverend Brooks. Life had settled into a new rhythm since then. Katherine continued teaching the children, though now she did so as their legal mother rather than their teacher. The adoption papers had been finalized just a month after the wedding grant, and Katherine officially becoming parents to Thomas, Anna, Michael, James, and Sarah. Rebecca had remained at the Circle X through the winter, but now divided her time between the ranch and Kingston, where Jonathan Peterson had indeed purchased the mercantile. His courtship was proceeding with proper decorum but growing warmth, and Katherine suspected a second wedding would likely occur before the year's end. The sound of hoofbeats drew Katherine's attention to the road, where she spotted Grant returning from checking the spring calves. He rode with the easy grace that still made her heart quicken, even after months of marriage. As he dismounted and handed his horse to Thomas, now 15, and growing into a capable young man, Grant looked up and caught sight of Katherine on the porch. His face broke into the smile that was no longer rare but still precious to her. "How are my two favorite people today?" he asked as he climbed the steps, one hand reaching out to gently touch her growing belly. "We are both excellent," Katherine replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though your son is becoming quite active." "Son, is it?" Grant teased. "Yesterday you were certain it was a daughter," Katherine laughed. "Either way, this child is determined to make their presence known." Her expression softened. "The children are excited about their new sibling." Sarah has already picked out names for both possibilities. "And what has she decided?" Grant asked, his arm around Katherine's waist as they entered the house together. "Elizabeth for a girl, after your first wife," Katherine said gently. "She overheard us talking once and decided it would be a nice way to honor the past while embracing the future." Grant's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "And for a boy, Jonathan, after my father." Katherine smiled at the sentiment behind the children's choices. "Though I told her we would consider all options carefully." "Wise as always," Grant murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. The sound of children's laughter echoed from the schoolroom, where Rebecca was supervising an art lesson. Sarah's voice rose above the others. Her once silent nature now blossomed into occasional chatterbox. "Hard to believe how much has changed in a year," Grant observed, his voice tinged with wonder. "From that day in Laramie to now." Katherine nodded, understanding completely. "When you said you'll both have a home with me, I never imagined what that would come to mean." "I didn't know myself," Grant admitted. "I just knew I couldn't leave you there, couldn't let what happened to Elizabeth happen to you and Rebecca. But somewhere along the way, a house became a home," Katherine finished for him. "And strangers became family." Grant's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of deep love. "The best kind of family," he said. "The kind we chose each other." As they moved together toward the sounds of their children, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them here from the darkest moment of her life to its brightest. What had begun as a transaction had transformed into something sacred and profound, a love built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the daily choice to see the best in each other. In the end, the home Grant Xavier had promised that day in Laramie had become far more than a physical place. It had become a sanctuary of the heart, where wounded souls could heal and broken pieces could be made whole again. And as Katherine felt the flutter of new life within her, she knew that this home they had built together would endure, a legacy of love for generations to come.